Well, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Great. Thank you all for coming today for our discussion on courageous conversations. For the Walker College of Business here at Appalachian State, Courageous Conversations started a couple of years ago as students were asking, how do I prepare myself to deal with things like microaggressions or discrimination of others in the workplace? So we started this panel discussion. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge all of our campus leaders who have joined us today, such as Acting Dean Sandy Vanoy, Associate Dean Marty Mesner, and all of our department chairs and program directors. And if we were in a physical space, we'd all have name tags and you'd be able to see where everyone was from and you'd be able to identify some of that representation. So if you're a department chair or program director or an administrator that I didn't call, if you could type your name and your department or area, I think it's really important for students to see that kind of representation in these types of sessions. Last but not least, I would like to welcome Dr. Willy Fleming. He's Appalachian State's Chief Diversity Officer, and he's going to bring formal greetings on behalf of Appalachian State.
Good afternoon. It is always an honor to be a part of this important dialogue. In courageous conversations, individuals are encouraged to express their views openly and truthfully, rather than defensively or with the purpose of blaming and laying blame on others. An integral to courageous conversations is an openness to learning. Many years ago, I did my student teaching at a poverty-stricken Black middle school in the Charlotte area. And my cooperating teacher, an older Black man, said these words to me. He said, Willie, it does not matter how gifted the educator is, an effective teacher creates an environment whereby learning can happen. What I have witnessed over the years at these courageous conversations is an environment that is conducive for learning to happen. I have witnessed insightful dialogue around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Participants leave this place not only more informed, but charged for action. Considering the experiences and the expertise of today's panelists, participants, you are in for an hour of exchange that will provide opportunities for learning to happen. All the best to you. Welcome to Courageous Conversations, Spring 2020 in collaboration with the Black Lives Matter at School Week. Thank you again, Jamie, for the opportunity to be here today. I'm actually presenting at 4, so I'll slip out quietly. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Dr. Fleming. At this time, I'm going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves and to give their name, where they're from, and a little bit of their educational and work background. And then I'll give some instructions for what we'll do for the breakout room. And so all 6 of our panelists have shown up today, so we're really excited. I'm going to start with Brittany, and I'll allow you to introduce yourself and go from there.
Thank you, Jamie. Hello, everyone. My name is Brittany Hodges Bulka. I am an educator in Lincoln Public Schools in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I serve in I wear a lot of hats here at my school. I serve as a student council advisor as well as the athletic director over all sports and activities in my school. I hold a master's of education and admin, and so hopefully I can move on up in the ranks and have my own school one day to make some rules. But for now, I'm just really pressing on diversity in my school and working on having conversations like this among my students, as well as my fellow staff members. So I'm glad to be here, and hopefully you guys find what we have to say today to be insightful.
Great, thanks, Brittany. And now we'll have Dr. Alabi.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Olamide Alabi. I'm originally from Nebraska. I'm a vascular surgeon in Atlanta, Georgia at Emory University Hospital. I also work at the VA hospital here in Atlanta as well. I know a few people on this call, so it's very good to see some of these people, some blasts from the past, I would say. But thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to share and to listen and to learn as well, so that we can all kind of dialogue together.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And now we'll have Mr. Johansi Christi.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Johansi Christi. I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska. I graduated law school with Jamie, and I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to make this call. I'm happy that I'm here. I'm excited to have this conversation and participate. I was a public defender for, oh gosh, probably a decade. I was recently appointed as the city attorney for Lincoln. Appointed, not elected, so appointed by the mayor, approved by the city council. I've been in this position for just over 6 months. So, like I said, looking forward to talking with you guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And if you notice, those first three folks, I actually went to high school with them. So we've spent a lot of time together over the years, even distant and apart. And our next panelist I actually went to college with. So Britney Smith. I'm sorry,
Hi,
Brandy.
I'm Brandy. No, it's okay. You have a Brittany and a Brandy. It happens all the time. I'm Brandy Smith. I work for Lincoln Financial Group. I've worked there for 8 years. My education is, I have a bachelor's degree in elementary education, and I have a Juris Doctorate as well. My current role within Lincoln Financial Group is Vice President Diversity within the workplace and legal counsel. So it's a combined role. I went to Nebraska Wesleyan University and for undergrad and in Creighton Law School, both in Nebraska. I currently reside outside of the Philadelphia area for one of our offices here. I know we have an office in Greensboro as well that you may all be familiar with. I have 2 kids, a 1.5-year-old girl named Rosie and a 6-year-old boy named Nikos. And I'm also a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Randy. And then last, we have a duo of Timothy and Jennifer Bibb.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tim. This is my wife, Jennifer. We're from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, but we recently just moved and relocated to Rochester, New York. And so it's really cold and snowy. We right now pastor at a church at Glory House International. I'm the associate pastor, and I'll let Jen tell you a little bit about what she does.
I graduated from John Wesley University with my bachelor's in Christian counseling. I'm getting my master's right now to finish out that counseling degree with a focus on trauma. For the last 2 years, I worked with people that had persistent mental illness. And now, once I moved, though, I needed like a break from that. So I worked back in the nonprofit sector, and I worked with an agency called Connected Communities. And we work very directly in an impoverished neighborhood. I don't like to call that, but a neighborhood that needs some assistance in Rochester. And our mission is to just work on pulling people out of systemic poverty and into doing a lot of anti-racism work. So we love that. I love that.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for coming. We're really excited to have you here. And before we break into groups, I'd like to introduce our 2 student moderators. We've got Zoe Huffines, who's a senior Walker Fellow from Holly Springs, North Carolina. She's currently majoring in management with minors in sustainable business and experiential and integrative learning. And then we have Samuel Littauer, who's also a senior Walker Fellow from Hendersonville, North Carolina, and he's majoring in management with minors in religious studies and communications. So I have a pre-assigned groups for each registered participant. And so in group A, we'll have Zoe as the moderator, Mr. Christie, Ms. Hodges, and Dr. Alabi in group A, and Samuel will be the moderator for group B for Mr. and Mrs. Bibbs and Ms. Smith. And so I really hope that this allows our panelists a little more time to go in depth into their responses and maybe allow for some Q&A at the end. If you have questions, feel free to type it in the chat to your moderator. And if there's time, the moderator will get to those questions. And we'll return to this space around 2:50, between 2:50 and 2:55 to wrap up all of our participants hearing final comments from the panelists.
Yay, it worked. Alrighty. My name is Zoe Huffines, and I'm going to be moderating some of the questions today for our panelists. second. Alrighty, I'll start with the first question. Make sure all of our panelists are here. Everybody made it into the room okay. Is anybody hearing some feedback? All good? Okay, perfect. So the first question is, there are times where someone may experience a form of direct discrimination. But for this question, the panelists, would you please identify an example of an unconscious bias and or a microaggression that you have observed in your workplace? And then how did you navigate this experience? And what were the key takeaways from that experience?
I can go first. So again, my name is Brittany Hodges and I work in education. I actually work in a middle school setting. In my experience, what I noticed most, so just a little background about my school, we're the smallest school in my city, so we have 444 students. Of that, 71% of our students are at or below the poverty line, and 52% of our students are students of color. And so it's Lincoln, as progressive as people like to think it is, we have a very north side, south side demographic of our students. The lower middle class are typically going to be on the north side of Lincoln. The south side of Lincoln is going to be where your wealthier individuals reside. So what I noticed in my school, being that I am a title school, is the lack of identifying student of color for our gifted program. I've taught gifted language arts, I've taught excelled Spanish, and when I look around my class, I see students that don't really mirror the demographic of our school. You figure if we're 50% students of color, 1 and 2 students honestly should be what mirrors the gifted program. However, that's not the case. And me being so passionate about education, I've had several conversations with my admin about this. And even when I was testing my own daughter for gifted services, a lot of times it falls by the wayside, because if a parent might not be as active or not able to be as active in their student's education, sometimes that's received by educators as the parent doesn't have an interest in their student being able to advance those next programming. So what we've started doing at my school is identifying students who are at a certain grade average, as opposed to solely off of recommendations. We don't look at the recommendations anymore, because that in itself is going to be a bias, or presents for a bias, because a teacher, if they see a student who doesn't put their hand up, maybe the subject doesn't interest them, but the teacher sees that as they are not being receptive to the learning, or maybe it's not interesting enough to them. Maybe the assignment didn't spark the student's interest, so they're turning in a few sentences as opposed to that student that's giving full out paragraphs. So rather than going solely off of recommendations at my school, we actually look at how the students are performing academically. And that really takes away someone's bias or their own microaggression of not thinking that student would be qualified for our accelerated services for our gifted students. I think just one thing as an educator, what I have learned is no 2 students are alike, and we really have to find different modes of our teaching to tap into our students, whether it's a visual, maybe it's a different type of a reading, maybe you introduce books that typically would not be read in your classroom, just so the students can see themselves in it. And you're not going to hit it home with the student every single time. However, if you are doing your job as an educator, as a lifelong learner, you're going to build upon what you know and hopefully find something that sparks the interest of your students, so you can start identifying those students who are gifted or just might not have had that opportunity to shine in your classroom if you were doing something that you've been doing for the last 10 years.
Thank you so much. And is another one of our panelists like to answer that same question?
Hi, Olamide Alabi here again. I work in healthcare. So you know, I have many examples when you say, have you ever experienced microaggressions? I actually don't call them microaggressions, but I don't necessarily find anything micro about them. But I would say that as a surgeon, it is often the case that people don't necessarily think of someone that looks like me when they think of who is the surgeon. So there are many times when I walk into a patient's room when they think I'm, you know, with environmental services, or I'm there to bring in their food trays or lunch trays or something like that, or just anyone but the doctor, right? So that is a frequent occurrence. But what I would say in those situations, you just have to call it out every time. You know what your level of expertise is, you know the training that you went through to get to this point. And while I'm happy to hand you the tray if it's next to me, you know, that's not what I'm here to do. So I'll let you know exactly what procedure you need, what the risks and benefits of that procedure are, and then you know, get you through it. I would say in other situations, because of the role that I play, where I'm at an academic institution, so we teach surgical trainees, both residents as well as fellows, and it can be difficult. You know, sometimes I actually find it easier to advocate for my residents or fellows than it is sometimes to advocate for myself. For example, I'll give you a quick example. There was a young male, Black male, who just graduated from medical school. So he's a physician. He has an MD. He is now an intern, a first year general surgery resident on our service. I'm a vascular surgeon, so on the vascular surgery service. We do a lot of wound care for patients who have poor blood flow, who we just revascularize. So he provides the wound care, he changes the patient's dressing on their foot, yada, yada. You know, everything goes fine with that exchange. There's not a problem, at least, you know, during the time. One of my partners, older white male, who is rounding with a fellow who happens to be a Black female surgeon, who's in training, additional training to become a vascular surgeon. So they walk into the room to round on the patient later on in the day, and the patient makes the comment about the person who changed his dressing, that Black boy, yada, yada. I can't even remember what the statement was he said afterwards, but, you know, obviously that's a very inflammatory comment that's made. So he referred to him as a Black boy. And before he could even finish the sentence, the Black female fellow says, "Stop. You mean that Black man who has an MD, he is a physician who's in training to be a surgeon, who did you the benefit of changing your dressing this morning. That's who you're referring to?" So she stopped him and called it out. And actually that exchange wasn't the interesting part of the story for me. It was later, after they finished talking with the patient, discussing the patient's plan for the day, and, you know, finishing up that conversation, they go out into the hallway, and then she essentially gets scolded by my partner by saying, you can't correct someone like that. He's an older white male. He grew up in the South. He's lived in the South his entire life. You can't change his beliefs. You can't change who he is, right? And she said, "I'm not here to change the hearts and minds of anyone, you know, to be honest, but you will respect me and you will respect the people that I work with." Come to find out, that gentleman, the patient, he actually was very apologetic. He, the next time that they all were together in the room, he, you know, was crying. He was so apologetic and profusely just, you know, ashamed of the exchange that took place. So there are changes that can be made in those types of situations. And I think it's very important. It doesn't always have to be in a confrontational way, but I think it's very important to call those sorts of things out.
Okay, I can say something as well. I'll be brief, I think. Again, Johansi Christi. I'm here in Lincoln, Nebraska. As I said at the intro, I was recently appointed as city attorney, and there's probably lots of things I could talk about, but I would say generally, you know, I find oftentimes people are asking, you know, how I got here, right? Or what is it that implying that I shouldn't be here, right? Or implying that they needed me here, you know, because of what I look like or some quota or something like that. And what I would say about that in lots of other examples or situations, I try to look at those as an opportunity, kind of like what Olamide was saying. I've always called them teachable moments. I stole that, I think, from my father, who was an educator for many years. And I think in that moment, what I try to do is ask some questions clarification, follow up, maybe what is it that what maybe you ask, what is it that you meant by that, or those sort of things. I also try to stay calm and remind myself that this is bigger than me, right? And it's not about this particular situation. It's not even about this particular conversation that I'm having with this person in this moment. It's bigger than this. It's about the future, and it's about who's coming after us and how we're gonna grow as a community, as a society. And so I try to come at it from that angle, or at least think about it from that angle when I'm having those conversations. So.
Thank you, Mr. Christie and Dr. Alabi, and of course, Ms. Hodges Bulka. The next question that I would like to ask all of you is, how have your experiences as an employee been affected in this past year of 2020, and the increased attention on racial issues?
So I don't think that my experience is unique to just myself. I think that in any situation, particularly like the one that we had, here as of late, with the standstill on life that is the pandemic, and then the expose on pre-pandemic ills that we face in healthcare and education in all spheres of life. As it relates to racial discrimination, gender discrimination, all sorts of discriminations, other discrimination. While well-meaning people are trying to kind of grapple with information that may be new to them, life experiences that may be new to them, it's interesting because the conversations are still just as uncomfortable or awkward as they were before, I would say. I like to think of the people that I work with as very, I guess you could say learned people, very well-educated people, but they still have their own biases. They have their own implicit and sometimes explicit biases. And even these people don't understand that these things happen, right? So to try to explain your life, my 37 years on earth, to try to explain that in a 5-minute discussion is just not going to happen. It's not going to work. But you can discuss different texts that they can read. You can discuss maybe movies or whatever media that they would like to use, so that they can educate themselves. But usually, in my experience, that has not been the route that people take. The route actually has been more, and so I'm in academia, but on the healthcare side, the route has been more to make underrepresented minorities and women, just inflicting more of the black tax, right? What we call the black tax. So, okay, we need to have diversity, equity, inclusion. We need to have an officer. We need to have a council. We need to have a committee. How about you put that together and you can be in charge of it, or maybe the assistant, right? Like you do more work so that we can learn about what we need to do. And so just inflicting that black tax, or, as we call it, it's not just to Black people, but that black tax on people is, it's only adding to the stressors that exist as being an underrepresented minority in a field such as I am, or a woman in a field such as I am. And I just don't think that people understand that.
Okay, so yeah, this is an interesting question, and I'd say especially for me, being the city attorney, I'm uniquely situated to be able to try to effectuate change, right? And so I'm gonna have a little bit of a positive spin on this, and what I would say is that I have found that people are open to discussions. I think more than they have been before. They're open to exploring alternatives. That's the positive thing, okay? My concern is that I'm seeing a lot of lip service. I don't know that people are actually ready to do anything other than talk about it. And again, the position that I am in right now, while I am uniquely situated, I think, to be able to hopefully make a serious impact, right? Effectuate change. There are a lot of forces, right, that are in place, that have been in place long before I got here. And so another thing that I am finding is I think that this recent events have really exposed a lot of that, a lot of the forces and structures that are in place that should have probably never been there in the first place, or certainly need to be, reevaluated, reexamined, and looked at. And that has been really difficult, I think. But I'm happy to see that the conversations are, I think, more likely to happen. At least that's what I'm seeing. Because I think without the conversation first, right, we're not going to be able to move forward. So that is a good thing that I'm seeing. It's not enough though.
So what I'm seeing in my role, I guess, is kind of two sides to it, as far as one dealing with the pandemic. And then on the other hand, we still have a lot of racial injustices that are taking place. And so what I'm noticing in my school, while I said, 50% of our students are students of color, since school started, they did offer the opportunity for students to be remote. And with that, about 50% of our Black students opted to work from home, remote. And, you're throwing teachers into this where, if you didn't grow up using technology, you might not be as savvy when it comes to things like Zoom or how to share a screen. And so those students who are at home are truly the ones that are going to be suffering, because it's like they're a fly on the wall in a classroom where they're not getting the attention. They're saying that our students who are Zoomers are missing up to 2 years worth of education. So you figure they're sitting at home, you're trying to engage them, but those are the students we really need to be in our building. And so, when the vaccine, came out, a lot of people would ask, hey, are you getting it? And we just had conferences, and a few parents would talk to me, and I would notice that a lot of the Black students' parents were like, no, we're not getting that. And I think there's still that mistrust of healthcare, and several reasonings for that. So that's hurting, the students of color. And again, not just my Black students, but our students of color who have that mistrust. On the other side of it, pre-COVID, we were full out revved up for equity training, diversity. Everybody wanted to throw someone in a position to be the chief diversity officer. Well, we get those people in those positions, and we're not having regular meetings. We're disseminating information, but we're not following up for dialogue or feedback with people. So we're having these meetings where people have the information in hand, but they don't know what to do with it. So it's filling the bookshelf, but it's not really going into the head shelf, right? And so I see there's so many opportunities for improvement in these areas, whether it's, bridging the gap between healthcare and our individuals of color, but also when it comes to, I can't always be the Black voice. I'm the only Black teacher in my building. That doesn't mean that every question needs to come to Brittany. While I don't mind helping educate people on certain things, that should not be my job. And, it sounds bad that way, but again, I've never told someone, hey, I'm not going to, answer a question. But at the same time, you're paying people in other areas to do this, but you're doing it for free and expecting me to do it for free. And so kind of like, what Johansi said, it's a lot of lip service. I love the district that I work for, but I do feel like it needs to rev up, recruitment, retention. How are you going to keep these staff of color? Students need to see someone that looks like them in an administrative capacity at some point in their career, as opposed to I had one Black teacher in my 12 years in a public school setting. And so, I think it did take a backseat to COVID. However, at the same time, I don't think that there's a lack of individuals that could be working simultaneously to be combating both of these at the same time. It's just a matter of, what is it worth to those in charge to fill those gaps.
Thank you so much. And that previous question, just to remind everyone, was how have those experiences as an employee been affected by the events of 2020? And now I'd like to ask, those events of 2020, that, like police violence and the political unrest, I'd like to ask the panelists, how did your organization react to those events? And what is your assessment of how effective it was and what you think that they could have done better?
I'll go for this one. So the summer of 2020, we all know the events that took place. In Lincoln, there were several protests that took place. Some people will say there are protests, other people will have other names for them, right? Riots, but really it was people, for the most part, protesting because they wanted the equal treatment and fair treatment, basic human rights. Starting back to school, we had conversations about this, and I serve as the equity co-chair here. So I'm the person that provides those readings to people, gives those resources. And I felt like we really did prepare our educators to the best of their ability for coming back, as far as providing them with that information. But again, it's how they're processing that information and how comfortable they really are having these conversations. And what I learned was a lot of my staff that I work with are not comfortable talking about issues that affect Black people or people of color in general. It's just a level of discomfort for them. And I always say you have to experience that discomfort to get to the point of comfortability. And so, we had students coming back. Most of my overwhelming number of my students, when they're home, they're filling that parent role, the parental role. So they're taking care of the younger siblings. Their parents are working that second and third shift. And so the students have other things to worry about on top of, everything that took place this summer coming back to school. And what I found was my organization, I think, and again, not faulting them, but they were not prepared. I'm prepared as a person of color, knowing I'm going to be working with students that look like me, and I'm connected to what took place. However, sending out an email to your staff is not providing them adequate knowledge of how to have these conversations, right? So I think about when prior to the election, Black face paint was left in my classroom. Okay, so I had some issues with some students, and they started basically harassing me to the level where the police had to be involved with this. The reaction to coworkers, where I really realized that disconnect was there, was when a lot of people at our staff meeting didn't know the significant or the historical context of Black face paint and minstrel shows. And these are educated individuals who, I would have thought would have known the significance of certain markings or certain really just hateful things that were taking place. And even after, the election took place, I can say the district sent out an email simply saying, don't show the events live, because they were afraid of what was going to take place on live TV. But I can remember, my sophomore in high school when 9/11 happened, they were wheeling in the TV screens. And so I'm thinking, why are we sheltering our students and our staff from the realities of what's really happening outside of these classroom doors? And it's not like we're filling that time with education. You need to, we as educators need to understand, you can't just do a 10-minute conversation and then have no debriefing, because that's going to set the students up for those experiences the rest of the day. Emotions are going to be high. And again, if it's uncomfortable for an adult to talk about, imagine what it's like a student who's genuinely living in this and having these experiences. And so I feel like it goes to the point where everyone's doing just enough to say we've checked it off the box, but it's how are you going to dig deeper? And sometimes you're not going to be the fan favorite, the crowd favorite with what you choose to do. But at the same time, those are questions that you can answer after the fact. But I feel like when you're in a leadership role in a district that educates 44,000 students a year, you have to be in the position to know what's the best for your the students in your community versus sheltering them, doing things like say don't show the inauguration, which is a historical thing in itself. Watch it tomorrow when we've cut out everything that we think will taint your imagery. So that's just what I've experienced in the educational world with that.
I just want to echo some of the statements that people have made already regarding institutional responses to this, to everything. It has been, like Johansi said, a lot of lip service in the institutions in which I work. There are, everyone, I'm sure at your own institution, just like mine, we got the emails, right? We got the emails from our department chairs, from our deans, from the president of the university, who at Emory was a brand new person. He hadn't even moved here yet, but we got the emails. And things are going to change. This is, we're in this together. We had the white coats for Black Lives sorts of things. Everything's posted on social media, everything's on the news, but then what happened after that? And I think so I can talk about a couple things that I really appreciated that did come from it, that I'm not sure would have necessarily, I can tell you it wouldn't have happened if this wasn't on such like a large scale. So one thing in particular, which I'm not sure if you guys have this at Appalachian, but bystander training. So there has been this push to include bystander training as well as implicit bias training for individuals who work in healthcare at this point at our particular institution. I was also asked where I did my fellowship. I did my vascular surgery fellowship in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, at the Oregon Health and Science University. And they invited me via Zoom to be a part of a health equity and accountability rounds, something that they just created after the wake of George Floyd, actually, so that they can talk about in healthcare when we experience situations where we are in a place with a patient and we feel that there's either racial discrimination, gender discrimination, just other discrimination. How do we, what are our rights as physicians? What are their rights as patients? And how do we negotiate those rights? And how do we provide optimal care, but still, are not placed in a situation where we are made to feel any kind of way or even sometimes fear for our own lives in those kind of situations. So there have been those types of health equity and accountability rounds that have popped up in various healthcare institutions across the nation. There's been bystander training, which I think is important. These crucial yet very uncomfortable conversations that people have avoided for a long time. How do you have those conversations? How do you confront either yourself or who do you go to when you are confronted with these types of situations? So I think bystander training is very important. Another thing that has come with this, so my department, the Department of Surgery here at Emory, they asked me to be the faculty lead for a anti-racism curriculum for the general surgery residents. And I know that would have never happened, if the whole world hadn't changed, with the pandemic and with George Floyd and with Ahmaud Arbery and with everything, Breonna Taylor, everything, right? It was so exposed, it's in such a vulnerable state that we were so exposed to everything that people couldn't really deny it anymore or behave as though it doesn't happen anymore. And with this curriculum, we're starting with residents who come into general surgery during the first 2 weeks before their actual residency starts. There's a boot camp that we always do. It's usually regarding surgical skills, but now we're also going to talk about the history of Emory as it relates to racism, the history of the hospitals that they'll be working with as it relates to racism. I mean, there are still physicians and surgeons and nurses and everyone. There are still people that work at a particular institution. I'll just say Grady Hospital. There are still people that work there now who worked there at the time when Black patients could not be admitted to that hospital. So this is not 500 years ago. This is not 200 years ago. This is very recent. These things have happened in our very recent past, not necessarily when I was alive, but certainly when other members who worked there were alive, right? And we need to confront that. We need to stop acting like those things did not happen. So there are some good things. I'm not completely a pessimist. There are some good things that came from this.
Well, I like just what you ended on. I often remind people that the leaders of this country, the leaders of this world, you know, most of them lived through Jim Crow, which really wasn't that long ago. And I like to remind people of that sometimes. This is a difficult question for me because, you know, I am the city attorney, right? And so I represent the city. And so part of my role, I also represent police officers, firefighters, right? The city council, the lawmakers, the mayor, right? I'm legal counsel to all of these entities and these individuals and elected officials. And so it has been, I would say, extremely challenging for me. I'm not going to, you know, talk about all of the things that the city has done or is trying to do. But what I would just say generally is I think that what we are trying to do, the city is, we're trying to apply an equity lens to policies and programs, including, you know, criminal justice reform, including what we are doing with the police officers and their policies and use of force policies. And we have a police advisory board, citizens police advisory board. We're trying to do some things with that as well. But, you know, I'm in a unique position to be able to try to deal with some of these issues. And in a lot of ways, I feel like I get it from both sides. It will never be good enough, I feel like, just personally. And I think one of the reasons I say that is I feel like sometimes progress goes at the speed of trust, okay? And so I think that sometimes at the role that I'm in, this is a marathon, you know, and it's unfortunate, but I think that it's true. And if you are really in a position like I'm in, you'll realize that, right? And this has to be, I have to carry this torch until I'm no longer here, and I have to pass it to someone else to keep moving us forward. So. I'm interested to see if people have any questions.
Yes, we do have, it looks like 4 extra minutes before we return to our large group. So if the group has questions, we can either put those in the chat, or I think we also might be able to unmute and just be able to ask.
And if you're trying to unmute and you can't, if you'll raise your hand, we'll make sure we can help you. And Zoe, I wanted to note too that there is one question in the chat box, and I think we've already gotten a couple replies to it, but we're looking for any readings or videos that the panelists or others would suggest for an honors first year seminar on social justice so that we can incorporate those. And so relating to criminal justice law, health disparities, educational inequalities. So if anyone can send those Jamie's way, we'll share those back out. So
I think if you also like if you go to, I don't know how it is in the College of Business, but in the Reich College of Education, there's a page where all of the sessions are listed, and then there's like a resources link. So there's a lot of cool resources that have been shared in some of the other sessions related to restorative justice, reproductive justice, that might be of interest to a first year seminar.
And I can throw in a comment here as well if I'm not interrupting anyone, but just from working on our shared reading program, we did a lot of readings. There were a couple books that I think would be really great, and one is Stamped which is, it's like a rewritten remix of Stamped from the Beginning, written for more for like high school, college students by Abraham X. Kendi. And then The Hate You Give is actually a novel, but I think it would be really great for like a freshman seminar class. So I could recommend those just from some of the reading we've been doing lately.
I actually read The Hate You Give, and I think that'd be a great book also for a seminar. So
there is a podcast from the same people that did 1619 called Nice White Parents. It is free, and if you have not heard it, it's a 6-part, pretty much a docu-series where they look at inner city schools in Brooklyn, and they just talk about how inner city school that was heavily populated with students of color was then partnered essentially with a group of nice white parents who wanted to integrate it for their students for what seemed to be all the wrong reasons. It's pretty quick. It's very interesting. Like I said, Nice White Parents, and it talks a lot about the educational inequities that, it's inner city New York, but it could be inner city Lincoln, Nebraska, Detroit, Philly. So definitely worthwhile listening to.
Thank you so much. I've got my list going. I have some homework for the weekend, so thank you all.
I believe we'll be returning in just a moment. Again, I just wanted to thank Miss Brittany Hodges Bulka and Dr. Alabi and Mr. Johansi Christi.
That's cool. Great. Well, it looks like everyone has made it into this breakout room. First off, thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation and for this event, Courageous Conversations. These events happen every year within the Walker College of Business. And a special thank you to our panelists for taking time out of your day to join us. We're excited to learn from you and hear about how we can build a more equitable world in our work places and through our work experiences. So with in mind, I'll go ahead and jump into the first question, and then at the end of the moderator-led questions, I'd love to see some student-led questions in the chat. Feel free to type those in and I'll read those off. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. So panelists, there are some times where someone may experience a form of direct discrimination, but for this question, can you identify an example of an unconscious bias and or a microaggression that you've observed in the workplace? If so, how did you navigate this experience of a microaggression? And what were the key takeaways from that experience?
Oh, I'm off of mute already. I can start. Brandy Smith here. And to talk about one, is to narrow it down a lot. It happens every day. I think everywhere we go, from the grocery store to Walgreens, CVS, to sometimes even with family members, in your own household. The experience that I'll share that I've observed in the workplace, it's a direct experience of mine. Let me just give a disclaimer that I love my company. I love Lincoln Financial Group. Nothing that I'm saying is going to be negative against them, but I can tell you that, in the workplace, when you have real people who go through real life things, some of this stuff does happen. And it's something that you can do to avoid it until everyone's on the same page. And I don't think we'll get there anytime soon. Have to work towards it. So I'm a lawyer. Before stepping into the diversity and inclusion space within the company, I worked on our legal department completely. And I'm Black, I'm a woman. I'm probably, at that time, I was the youngest lawyer in the company, started right after the law school. And I led some pretty high profile things within the company. And time after time, I would have people ask for my boss to sign off on certain things. I had, people walk by my office looking for Brandy Smith, who they've communicated with via email so many times. In this one particular instance, there were two women, and they walked by the office, and I saw them walk back by the office, probably about 4 times, like looking for Brandy Smith. Mind you, I had a nameplate on outside of my desk. I'm outside of my office. I'm sitting at the desk and they're not looking at the nameplate. They're just looking at the people who are sitting in the offices. And then finally, one woman came back and said, can you tell me where Brandy Smith is? Mind you, I'm sitting at my desk. I'm not at the table. And I go, that's me. And she goes, you're Brandy Smith? I said, yeah. And then she turns to the other woman and goes, she's Brandy Smith. And they're like, shocked, so shocked that the person that they walked by 4 or 5 times was this lawyer who had provided them advice for, over a year. And so, I invited them in, and the question around how did I navigate this experience, I think they learned right then and there that they shouldn't make those assumptions. And it kind of, sometimes when you go through things like that, it kind of gives you that push to make sure that you prove that you are qualified, that, any negative thought that they have in their head around that person who's sitting behind the desk who completely couldn't be Brandy Smith goes out of the window. And so I pushed hard to let them know that, hey, I am Brandy Smith, and this is how Brandy Smith works. And when it was via email versus when it's in person, you get the same Brandy. And so I'll say that, the key takeaway from that experience for me was to kind of not be shocked that people are shocked of who I am and what I do, but to embrace it and to help educate along the way if I can.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, that's a tough thing to keep experiencing over and over, Brandy. So thanks for sharing. Last year, I was doing a de-escalation training for my company. The trainer and me, I don't know, he had to train me individually because I missed the broader training. When we were on the phone, he began to talk about one of the young men that he worked with, because of course we're working with people that have severe persistent mental illness. That is my background that I did for 2 years. And he's like, this kid, he's middle class kid. He's, he was from not rough neighborhoods. I'm the one that was from rough neighborhoods. And you would think that it would be, everybody mistook him for being in the rough neighborhoods and me for, they don't know how I grew up. They don't know what I came from. And I would ask him, I was like, what would make him have to be from the rough neighborhood versus you having to be from the rough neighborhood? Because you automatically got the benefit of the doubt of being in the middle class neighborhood because that's how people see you. But people automatically saw this middle class young Black male and immediately assumed that he was from something lesser. And so right then and there, me and the trainer, he's like, oh, I see what you're saying, because he began to talk to me about how he always had to work for everything that he got. And he doesn't see this whole difference in how people, assume that I guess it was about skin color. And I just immediately was like, no, you get the benefit of the doubt of being middle class when the middle class Black gentleman that you were counseling didn't. Do you not see the discrepancy in that? And to me, that was microaggressive, or probably overtly aggressive. He made an automatic assumption that because he's white, that he gets the benefit of the doubt without even realizing it. It came out of his mouth without even realizing it. He gets the better end of the stick.
Yeah, and I think like Brandy said, there's numerous moments that you can kind of rewind the tape and there was a microaggression happening. As a district manager for a company that I used to work for, whenever I walked into the room, I was usually the guy with the ability to say yes to whatever was being asked, whether it was because of resource or money or whatever. I was the one that gave the final answer, but I can't tell you how many times I walked to the room and they would automatically hand the paperwork to the white gentleman or, to whoever else was there that was white, instead of giving the paperwork to me, or even down to having company dinners and them handing the bill to the white guy because he must be in charge. He must own the company. He must be the one that is running the show. And so it's just something that you have to almost learn to live with, but you have to be uniquely yourself, and you can't allow it to deter you from your identity or who you know that you are, what you represent to your company or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So it's something that you live with, but bit by bit, I think 2020 has offered us an opportunity to see more and more allies come along beside us and start talking more and making sure those workplace microaggressions don't work or happen as often.
Yeah, thank you, Timothy and Jennifer and Brandy. And Timothy, kind of bouncing off what you said, you mentioned towards the end how 2020 really brought an opportunity for allyship. And a lot of these stories and experiences that were happening regularly became well communicated, and we were able to hear those stories together. Speaking on 2020, how have your experiences as an employee been affected by the events of 2020 and the increased attention on racial issues?
Well, 2020 was really intense, and it hit our family personally because I do a lot of community work, and because everybody was at home working from home, so I was able to finish a lot of my duties on my computer, and I had extra time on my hands. So I decided to work part-time for a lawn care company because they hired young guys from neighborhoods that just really needed help. And so I decided to join the team and be a mentor to those guys. And we were going to a section of North Carolina where I knew there was racism. I knew that there was the whole nine. And so I warned the guys before we even got out the truck. I said, look, if something happens, just get back into the Jeep and we're just going to leave. We're not here to entertain any foolishness. We're not going to get involved, because the guys that I'm with, they are fighters. They are like, no, you're not going to do me like that, So we went to start on a lawn. This is broad daylight. We've all got on uniforms. We have shovels. We have wheelbarrows. We have all kinds of materials that completely tell the story that these guys are here for lawn care. And sure enough, there was a lady who drove by, a white lady who drove by kind of slow. And I'm already thinking in my head, like, here it is, here we go. Now, this is in the middle of 2020. You would think that this would be the wrong time to racially profile somebody because it's highlighted, it's in the news everywhere. This is probably summer, like July, something like that. And she rolled by like 3 or 4 times. And I said, she's calling the police. And sure enough, a police officer came around, and I'm sorry. It makes me slightly emotional, but police officer comes around, and then another police officer, and I'm telling the guys, like, look, just chill, don't say anything, let me handle it, because I don't want them to step into that role, And my son was also working with me because he needed a summertime job, so he's watching his dad have to have this interaction. So I go and I talk to the officers, and I'm like, what's the problem? And they're like, well, somebody called in and said that there was suspicious activity going on. And I'm like, we're cutting grass, we're chopping trees. How is that suspicious? And the officer was embarrassed. It was extremely awkward. I didn't know how to, because I've never been profiled like that because of the color of my skin. And so the police officer basically apologized and left. The lady who called lived right next door, and she wouldn't come to the door, and the police officers couldn't go next door because that's the way phone calls to 911 work. And so after that, the news caught a hold of the story. It went viral. We were on the news everywhere, and she wouldn't come to the table to speak. And so I allowed it to get out to the news, to share the story so that it could be known that that was wrong and that my guys had to go through that. And my son had to watch me go through a situation where it could have went a whole nother way. So 2020 was intense on a personal level for our family, but I think that that's what Black people are having to do, which is to be resilient and push back, not to cause a disruption, not to, but I think it's called good trouble, to push back and to get into good trouble, to where we stand on our own 2 feet and we recognize ourselves as citizens, and we force the narrative that you're going to recognize us as a citizen of the same as you are.
Yeah. This 2021, we moved to Rochester. Our children go to a predominantly white Christian school. They watched the inauguration together with their classmates. those classmates began to say some really nasty remarks about Biden and about Kamala Harris. And as a mom, I just don't take those things lightly. So I immediately, I emailed all principals, I emailed teachers. I'm like, this, we will not have it. My kids' school will be a safe place for them to learn, and they will not have to experience racial aggression there. And of course, a white parent would not have to have that interaction with a principal about racial aggression. And so they did, they wrote me back. They were very apologetic. They've had conversations at the school, and they're still having the conversations. That was fine. We went on about our day. And then yesterday, our second grader came home because his friend called him a monkey yesterday. That was yesterday. And so we, again, have had to now have a conversation. The parents, you know, the teacher, bless her heart, she was wonderful. She had my son's back in safety. But mind you, like now, I'm having to look at this school in a different light. I sent my kids to this school because it's one of the best in Rochester. I needed them to have in-person classroom in a small setting. I needed them to have a safe place to go when I'm looking at the statistics moving into the area of the school districts. And here now we're on our third conversation with, you know, administration and teachers about, hey, this is unacceptable and I will not. I absolutely demand a safe place for my children. But again, my baby son comes home and he's like, Mommy, he asked the kid, he was like, I asked him, did you call me that because of my culture? This is my 7-year-old. Did you call me that because of my culture? And, you know, he's like, I know what you guys taught me. I know to be proud of myself. And I knew to go to the teacher, but this is what I'm having to teach my 7-year-old? It's outrageous, honestly.
I feel your pain there. I have a 6-year-old, so, you know, the conversations we have to have are so different. And, you know, I had to send my kid to the local public school just because he gets excited when he sees people who look like him. And all of the schools around us, you know, they're the ones that we have to pay for. They're not kids that look like him, you know, so I want him to feel comfortable before that. So I feel your pain there. When I think about the events of 2020 and the workplace, oh my gosh. So in March, our company sent everyone home to work from home. Oh, someone's not on mute. Your AirPod came out?
Yes.
Oh, you're not on mute. All right.
Oh, yep, I found it. Thank you.
You good? Okay. So with on top of the pandemic, you know, we went to work from home, which is already, you know, a big disruptor for a lot of people. And that was March. And so we're dealing with this transition later on in 2020 with the death of George Floyd. You know, we started to look at this additional crisis. And let me take a break just to give you a little bit of background. I serve, you know, in the role of right now diversity of the workplace, and prior to this, a lawyer at the company, and kind of a dual role now. But one of the things that I found the most joy and the most pride in is that I led the African American Business Resource Group for 5 years. And these are, you know, as you start to enter the workforce, these are like affinity groups kind of like some of the groups you have on campus that get a group of people, allies and people who have similar backgrounds together to make change in the workplace. And so I led this group for 5 years. And the weekend, Memorial Day weekend, 2020, my phone started blowing up, right? And it was not about the fact that there was a recording of someone dying on camera and, you know, calling out for his mom in the last words. It was about the fact that our company needs to say something. They need to do something. And my immediate response was, and this is just being completely transparent. Oh, that's sad. I'm sad to see that happen again, and just a numbness around seeing this happen over and over and over again with kind of here's another person, right? And so I'll say that to say that this, nothing about 2020, nothing about George Floyd's death changed the perception from my view, because almost every day I'm watching videos on social media and on the news where similar things are happening. But I think that it changed the perception from, on top of a pandemic that is impacting my community at a higher rate, on top of that, working from home and people dealing with children and whatever else they have going on at home, that because people aren't traveling, because everything is kind of at a standstill, more people, from what I perceive, were able to see what happened and to say, you know what, that's not right. And I think about Rosa Parks and how many other Rosas were before Rosa, right? There were people who were sitting and got refused to move, but there was something about that unique situation, the Rosa situation. There's something about the George Floyd situation that happened that lit a spark in not only the Black community, but also allies across the board. So within the company, my phone was blowing up and people were like, what are we going to do? We need to do something. The company needs to say something. And I'm like, yeah, they should say something. Right. And this went on. And I said, you know what, as the leader of the Black group within the company, I need to say something. I shouldn't wait for, the leader, the CEO, to say or release a statement. So with the statement that I released to the members of this organization, like I said, it's open to everyone within the company. It was just a statement of we're not okay. And it went into why we're not okay and why not just the Black population, but others in the company should not be okay. And it was let's unite, let's talk about this, because we know that before, when you left work, you kind of went home and you had your home life and you were able to separate the two. But in 2020, they became so intertwined that it was hard to separate. It's hard to say things that are happening outside of the workplace aren't impacting you inside the workplace. It's one and the same. And so we started what you all have started, these crucial conversations, these meaningful conversations. We had one starting in May, and there were so many people on the line, and there were tears shed. There were conversations that had never happened before inside of a company, not just unique to our company, but most corporate companies. You just don't talk about race. And what Tim and Jen had shared, or Timothy and Jennifer have shared, is that, the example of what they shared, people were sharing that within the company. And we started to realize that conversations are really where we unite as a people. Conversations and examples. I shared the example of my 6-year-old playing with a toy Nerf gun. And this was in a group of tons of people. I'm in front of like 1,000 some odd people. And I'm raised to not cry in front of people. Most of us are raised not to cry, in front of people. And I started to talk about how my son had this Nerf gun, and he was saying to his dad, let's go outside and play with it. Or no, his dad said, let's go outside and play with this. And my 6-year-old said, we can't do that, Daddy. What if the police think it's a real gun? And when you have to tell your 6-year-old, and that's when I got emotional telling people this for the first time and realizing it, but when you have to tell your 6-year-old, yeah, that's right, you can't do that, because of examples like Tamir Rice, when you have to have that conversation with your 6-year-old, it brings a perspective in you that no one can explain, no one can feel. So these conversations continue. We reach all of the employee population. The conversations are continuing from the CEO of the company to entry-level employees. People are still talking about race. People are still talking about all of the micros. People are still talking about how do we help? How do we move the needle? How do we educate? And because we started those conversations, we really are in a better place everyone doesn't agree with everyone. That you're not going to get that. But you also understand that people, some people within, whether they're Black, whatever category they fall in, across the board, across all of these different categories, there's a need for education. And if you're not educated around whatever that topic is, you're going to state your opinion based on what you've heard, based on your upbringing, what your family may have taught you, based on those unconscious biases that are inside of you. And so we realized that. We continue to talk. We have 8 actions. I don't know if any of you are on LinkedIn, but our company has these 8 actions that we've released that are really about how we as a company are going to make a change. We also had all of our employees, those who wanted to, take a pledge and say, hey, I pledge to do everything I can to educate, to move the needle, to make an impact for the Black community. And that's really how I feel like 2020 impacted us, and it's just continuing, and we're in a really good place. So I give kudos to your university for having these conversations way before, you know, others were having these conversations because of the importance of the impact that they could have.
Yeah, Brandy and Timothy and Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing those deeply personal experiences and experiences that carry a lot of personal pain and also reflect a lot of the anguish that's experienced throughout the entire community. And thanks so much for including us in those stories. And I'm deeply sorry to hear about each and every one of those. And Brandy, you mentioned some of the initiatives that your organization had put in place and initiatives that you were able to lead within your organization to bring about positive social change. My next question is about kind of corporate social responsibility in y'all's respective fields. How did your organization react to the events of 2020? And what is your assessment of how effective it was? And what do you think that they could have done better? And so, Brandy, I'm going to have you open it. If you want to describe a little bit of the effects of those initiatives that you put in place, that'd be great. And then we'll turn it back over to Timothy and Jennifer.
Okay, and I haven't pulled up. I'm not going to read all the details. As I mentioned, if you go on the LinkedIn site for Lincoln Financial Group, you can see them. But one of the things we've said is increasing the Black population within the company, not just at the general entry level, but across all levels of the organization. A focus on minority leadership, but minority leadership altogether, but with a focus on the Black officer population. We're exploring how to tie diversity and inclusion objectives to compensation. We have expanded our diversity and inclusion function, which includes my new role. The role that I'm in right now did not exist before. We have launched a few internal groups to better reach and impact people like financial advisors. We donated $100 million, not 100 million, 1 million to an organization called History Makers. And History Makers is the largest digital oral compilation of Black history that is out there. And so we understand the importance of the fact that there are stories and figures and people in Black history that aren't in textbooks and history books. You have to kind of search for them. So History Makers is who we've aligned with. We're also looking at our foundation. You know, most corporations have a big chunk of foundation dollars that they give out across, speaking of corporate social responsibility, across the nation. And we're really trying to target and figure out the best way to align and support some of the local organizations, nonprofit organizations. And then also empowering and growing our internal business resource groups and being really a source of how do we continue to support the employee population. So that's what we're doing. I could say we and most companies have a far way to go. So if I would say, what would I do different? Like we would have done this way before, 2020, just in general. But I think that some of the sight that 2020 brought to people really, really helped put into perspective the need around these sort of initiatives.
As a pastor, it's not as clear cut. And I'm sure that you all have kind of seen it played out, where you have those that attach their religious experience or their relationship with God to their political preference. And the line is even stronger when it comes to the church. So what happened is we would reach across the aisle, because our church is predominantly Black, and we would reach across the aisle to white pastors and share and have courageous conversations, and they went really well. And we were able to share facts from the Bible, even, stories that come from Africa that are in the Bible, but you just wouldn't know it because it's never been preached, it's never been highlighted. So we were able to show white ministers these stories so that they could not necessarily change the narrative of the gospel, but preach it from an angle that their Black congregants would appreciate, and maybe that they had never heard before. I didn't know that, baby Jesus went to Africa. That's the shirt that I have on now. These different facts. So that's kind of what we did in the church. And it's really hard. Honestly, I feel like if we were an organization, like a corporation, it would be maybe easier to flush out some of the divide. But in church, it is a difficult thing because people are ready to go to arms for what they've linked with the gospel. And it's really weird. So we're still navigating that space.
Yeah, I think personally, we had to take some strong stances, which is I will no longer worship in an environment where there is open racism, where there is open blind or willful blindness. Now we're new here navigating this Christian school situation, but I take a very strong stance against that. Last year, we created a book called 100 Black Facts that we believe every Black youth should know, Black, white, Well, we got that in our school district in Winston-Salem. We got a parent to get behind the book and to order some to put into the school libraries across the board there. COVID kind of shut down some of that process. So it's still actually in process of doing that. This experience that happened with my children, I immediately sent my book to 3 different people at the school, and they are going to have him do a chapel in the next week or so, and they're going to, they have a grassroots movement where they're going to introduce our book to the entire student body. And so really we just decided, like, what can we do individually that shows that our life matters. And I just take a stance of like, I'm here no matter where I step my feet, that's where I belong. And like it or not, I'm here. And that's just kind of my stance on that. So yeah, we had to just take a personal stance that was not corporate to say, hey, enough is enough. And we got some knowledge for you if you want it.
That's great to hear. I mean, there's so much that all of us can do individually and then collectively to kind of reform these systems and also be a part of reforming these systems individually. So thanks again for sharing this experience. We do have about 5 more minutes. If there's anyone in the student virtual Zoom audience that has any questions for our wonderful panelists, feel free to type those in the chat. And if we get any questions, we'd love to read those out. So we'll give a second or two to see if any questions arise, and then we'll turn it back over to y'all.
I'll just say while you're waiting for questions that all of you are here for a reason. I don't know the background behind, if you had to sign up for a course or if this is something that, you're really interested in and helping, but regardless of why you're here for a reason. If you want to talk further, I'm on LinkedIn. Like, I am a person who believes that if you have a question and you're afraid to ask someone what their opinion is, I can be that person for you. I think one of the biggest questions that I've heard recently is around, should it be Black or African American, and what's the difference? And some people are like, I don't even want to ask that question. But I'll just tell you, from my perspective, if you're struggling between the two when you're having conversations with your friends, families, whatever, the way that we've looked at it in corporate America is that the term Black is a lot more inclusive. It includes people who may not be from America. But at the same time, you know, you may have people who prefer one over the other. So there's no one right or wrong answer. The same thing, you know, I encourage you to look up terms around the LGBTQ plus community. I encourage you to continue to educate yourself, regardless of if it's the area that you particularly have a passion on or around. It's just so important to be good humans. And I know I got a comment around just humanity. And I think that that's the biggest thing that you can do is understand that we're human, people make mistakes, but taking that moment when it may be an unconscious movement or thought, and once you realize that you're thinking that, figuring out, okay, how do I prevent myself from thinking that again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we didn't get any questions from the chat, but before we kind of wrap up here, panelists, do y'all have any suggestions for readings or resources that you think would be helpful in kind of expanding our understanding of racial justice issues and building equity?
I host a book group on a book called The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. And really, if your background is Christian, you should absolutely read that book. You should read that book from start to finish, because it really speaks firmly, openly, honestly about the racism in the church. And so that book group of mine personally has like about 113 people in it. And I think that it's just a great resource. If you have an ability to take a course, the Racial Equity Institute, I think it's based in Greensboro. I did one of their trainings. It was phenomenal. You should absolutely go and take training from them. Racism is hard, right? And it's layered. There are so many things in it. I could name several other books, but I think that's a great place to start. If you're a white person, White Fragility is also a good place to start. I'm there with that too. And just realize, I think you have to have a lot of humility when you dip into wanting to learn more about it. There are a lot of Black people, unlike Brittany, right? I think so.
Brandy, me?
Brittany?
Brandy.
Oh my gosh. Unlike Brandy, who are not willing to answer your question. So you have to be careful as you navigate that. Be mindful of that. I think Tim and I are quite open, like Brandy is. So, but just be mindful, be careful, be humble, and be open and ready to learn, because this stuff will knock your socks off because they're not teaching it.
The one that I would recommend, and I know only I have 2 minutes left, the one I would recommend, I don't know the name of it, but there's a YouTube video, and I'll send it as a follow-up, and it's about a 17-minute video, and it just talks about the foundation of systemic racism in America. And to answer the question of if there's anything other specific that I would recommend, anything that is going to provide you some sort of perspective, anything that is going to give you education in an area where you feel like you need more, take it. I think that there's a lot of books and suggestions that kind of as a nation people are pushing towards, but I think you have to start where you're at and understand where you need to go. So anything to help educate yourself. There are a lot of documentaries that provide perspective as well, like even on Netflix.
Excellent. Yeah. And we're kind of coming to the close of our time here. I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us today, for taking time out of your busy days to be with us, to share your personal experiences, and to help us grow in understanding of these racial issues and helping us work together towards racial reconciliation. We appreciate y'all. And with that, I just want to say we can go ahead and exit back into the main discussion room. And from there, we'll offer closing statements. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Conversations in your smaller groups, and we're going to wait a few moments to allow the other folks to come back on over. And then we'll wrap up with some final comments from our panelists. All right. So I think we've got just about everyone back in this space. And hey, we're going to wrap up with some final comments from our panelists and give them a chance to say a few last words before we send everyone off. Thank you again for everyone who came out today. I know it's challenging to find time to do additional Zoom sessions on top of your work or on top of your school. So I really appreciate the time that you've taken to be out here. And we'll go ahead and start with Brittany for kind of final remarks about whatever you may not have had a chance to say in the last small group session, or anything else that you want to share with the larger group.
Yeah, I'll just add, when it comes to these uncomfortable conversations, just keep in mind you have to be uncomfortable to reach that point of comfortability. I said that in the last session, the group I was working with. So, you know, I'm not a person who's easily offended. And I think if someone is coming to me from a genuine place, I'm more than willing to have those conversations. So, you know, start those conversations, initiate those conversations, but be mindful that someone is opening up to you. Be it, you know, someone of a different gender or racial, ethnic background. So just be, you know, courteous of that and how you approach them, as well as keep in mind that this is something that's personal to them. And so when you're speaking, I wouldn't say necessarily tread lightly, but just be mindful that they're going to be more the expert about themselves than having you tell them about themselves. But definitely welcome those conversations. And it's really just all about your approach to it.
And then we'll go with Tim and Jennifer. Bibb.
Thanks for having us today. I think just like Brittany just said, it is going to get uncomfortable. But the truth is, many marginalized people, if that's what you like to call it, minorities, we live in that discomfort. That's our everyday life. So join in. Come along, you know, and get into the conversations, learn something that you didn't know, be humble with it, be open to it, and be ready to learn and to be challenged, because some of the things and the misconceptions that you've always kept, they're just simply not true.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us, Jamie. We really appreciate you and whoever else was involved in getting us on here. But I would also say just study the word empathy, and we all must do our best to allow empathy to settle in our hearts to the point where we understand it, we can exhibit it, we can see it, we can identify it. And I think empathy is the biggest thing. And it's the hardest thing because arrogance or pride or these types of things keep us from the ability to see the power of empathy. But if we can somehow practice humility and make our way towards empathy, it will open all of our eyes to maybe things that we've never thought necessary to learn before. But now we're finding, especially due to 2020, that it is absolutely necessary to reach across the aisle and to know what it is people are going through that don't look like us. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. And Johansi.
Sure. Yeah, I'll echo. Thank you for having me. I'm glad I was able to be here and participate. I would say, I think I said this earlier, but I really try to look at a lot of these situations as an opportunity. And I think if we are looking at it as an opportunity, I think that we can move forward. I know I mentioned teachable moments earlier as well. And I think that if we're coming at it from that angle, I think that we could move forward. I would also encourage you to focus on your local community. I think sometimes when we have these conversations, I think that gets lost. You know, we talk about, you know, access to justice or criminal justice reform and all of that. And I would say, you know, access to justice is local. Criminal justice is local. You know, they often said politics is local, but I think a lot of these issues are local issues. And I just would encourage you to start in your own communities. And I encourage you to be brave, encourage you to be bold. That's it.
Thanks. And Brandy.
I say, understand that when you put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand their story, it can be heartbreaking. It can be very uncomfortable. but sometimes heartbreaks are our biggest lessons, and we learn the most from those heartbreaks. And so it's okay. It's okay to know that it's going to be uncomfortable, but I challenge you to think about, how can I learn from this? How can I challenge people who may not have the same viewpoint, and have those conversations and continue them.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And Dr. Alabi.
I think she had to go see.
Oh, she got called
patients.
for a patient. Yeah.
Yes.
So she's a vascular surgeon, for those of you who didn't have the opportunity to listen to her. So she, you know, that kind of work doesn't wait for meetings to end. So we thank you again so much for everyone coming today, and a special thanks to our panelists. If you want to get in contact with any of our panelists, they're all on LinkedIn, so I'm sure they would love to connect with you there. And you all have a wonderful day.